Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Ragers episode 13. As usual, I have Pandemonia with me, and today we're going to be talking about something that's sort of more meta within Hearthstone, which is about where did like certain terms come from, right? So Pandemonia and I both have a Magic the Gathering background, so a lot of these terms have been very common or like well known to us, but they might not be as well known to a lot of other Hearthstone players. So to start off, we're going to be talking about zoo. So where did the term zoo come from, Pandemonia?
So Zoo came from a period of time where I actually just started playing Magic the Gathering around the
Hmm.
original Ravnica, which came out around 2003. And so the reason why it became known as Zoo was because the cards printed at the time were a bunch of sort of animal type cards. So you had a card, what you had Watch Wolf, you had Curd Ape, and you had Wild Cattle, which was like I think it was a monkey
Yeah, something like
or
that.
something like that. But basically, it was all these aggressively costed, cheap creatures that were quite aggressive, and so at that time, the deck kind of became known as Zoo because it was characterized by flooding the board with efficient, cheap minions, and then you got board control and you just bashed facing.
Yeah, and most of those minions, as you said, or creatures as they're called in Hearthstone, were animals.
Yeah,
So, the term zoo naturally lent itself to that. I mean, we had Curd
yeah.
Ape, which is obviously an ape, Watch Wolf,
There's a
a wolf.
wolf.
Yeah, unsurprising, which is not that common in Magic. So the deck kind of got termed that. And I mean, in Hearthstone, obviously, zoo is usually just used to refer to Warlock or Zoolock, um, which doesn't really have as much the beastie theme. It does have a card that even has similarish art to Watchwolf though, and that's Direwolf Alpha.
Yeah.
That's a card that's sort of characterized Zoo over the years. It's been pretty common in all Zoo builds since Classic or since Beta,
Well, it was
even.
kind of Reynad was because he also had a previous history in Magic.
Yeah,
I think he kind of coined because he was one of the sort of early pioneers of the original Zoo decks,
yeah,
and I think he kind of coined the term Zoo as
yeah,
opposed to just calling it aggro warlock or mid-range warlock or whatever it goes.
yeah. But I mean, Zoo is a deck that typically fights for board with cheap but slightly over powered for their cost minions.
Exactly.
So I mean in Hearthstone, I mean in Magic you see like Watchwolf, which is a 2 mana 3/3 when usually 2 mana only gets you a 2/2.
Yeah.
Uh,
And back
so
then it was good. Now a
yeah,
2 mana 3/3 is actually not that like because
not
of
that
power creep.
exciting no. Yeah,
But at that time, 2 mana 3/3 Wild Cattle could be a 1 mana 3/3. Could
Curd
Ape
Ape
is
a
like
1 mana 2/3.
yeah 1 mana two
Pretty
three.
much. Yeah, so I mean, in Zoo Lock, we see that in cards like Flame Imp as well.
Yeah, Flame is the best example.
Flame Imp's the best example. Yeah, its downside is obviously just doing damage to yourself, but it's a deck that controls the board a lot with sort of overpowered for their cost minions and goes very wide,
Yeah,
and that's common in both the Magic theme and the Hearthstone themed decks.
yeah.
Yeah. So next we have a term on the very sort of different end of the spectrum, and that's mill. So mill is also a term that comes from Magic, originally from the card Millstone, um, which put the top two cards of your opponent's library into his or her graveyard. So the idea here being that you took the cards straight from the graveyard to the library, which is
I mean, the
um,
library to the graveyard.
yeah, from the library to the graveyard, sorry, which is generally in Hearthstone seen as when you have like a full hand and then you force your opponent to draw. That's called milling them. Or if you have a full hand but you can't get rid of stuff, and then you sort of mill yourself. So in Magic, was a common strategy to try and win the game by milling your opponent.
Yeah,
Uh,
because as a side thing in Magic, if you try to draw a card when you have no cards left in your deck, you lose.
yeah,
As opposed to
just taking damage.
Hearthstone taking damage. Yeah, so I
Yeah,
think just to mention for those who are not so clear of Magic, that in Magic it was an actually instant win condition if
yeah,
you could maul your opponent to zero cards in their deck
yeah,
and make them draw.
yeah. So, well, I mean, you draw every turn, so if you can
Yeah,
just get them to the last and then pass, you would win.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that sort of was an archetype that existed in Magic, and we've seen that a bit in Hearthstone in decks like Mill Rogue and Mill Druid, probably
They were
the
kind of
two sort
things,
of
but
decks.
they were kind of decks, but not really.
Yeah, they never really took cards straight from the library to the graveyard or the deck to non-existence in Hearthstone. Um, but they were similar in the sense that they forced your opponent to overdraw, which essentially did that, right? Essentially took the cards straight from the deck and uh, burnt them without your opponent being able to see them
Exactly.
or
So
without being able to use them.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And next is a term that's probably not used that often, but you'll find it used a lot in reviews of sets, especially from a lot of pros that are ex
Magic
Magic
players.
players like Reynad or players like that, and that's cantrip. So do you want to explain what cantrip means, Banwania?
A cantrip is simply a card that can be seen as it draws a card, so basically it replaces itself. So a lot of the times in Magic, particularly, there were quite a few combo decks that revolved around basically playing very cheap spells that drew you another card, and then basically you could just go through
Yeah,
your deck quickly and draw cards. So cards like the simple example of cantrip is Novice Engineer,
yeah,
and if you remember Azure Drake, Rip Azure Drake,
yep.
you know
And
the fact,
Shiv is also a very good
yeah,
example. So it's generally cards that have a slightly underpowered effect for the mana cost. I mean, Azure Drake just being a 4 mana 4/4
second.
without drawing a card wouldn't really be good enough. But the fact that these cards replace themselves and help you get to other more important cards in your deck helps a lot um, with deck construction and stuff like that. I mean, we see that in Shiv and Novice Engineer being included in a lot of combo decks in Rogue and in particular in Mage. So yeah, cantrip is a term that
So,
comes from basically any cards that replace themselves with draw. Um,
so just brought to our attention an interesting, I think another cantrip that you can think of is a card like Hydrologist as well,
yeah,
because even though it doesn't draw your card, you get an extra card, so it replaces itself in that kind of way.
sure. Those cards are very much like, yeah, they are kind of cantrips, but yeah, not so much in the traditional sense exactly. Yeah. Um, and then next we have a term that's quite closely related to cantrips, um, and that's miracle. So, miracle is a term that is usually used to refer to Miracle Rogue in particular, and it's all about playing off the top of your deck. Essentially, when you have a gadget sound on the board and you play some cheap spells, you draw some more cheap spells and you play those spells kind of off the top of your deck. But this comes from a Magic the Gathering mechanic, which was even more true to the term miracle, right? So in Magic, you had cards with sometimes relatively powerful effects that you could play for a much cheaper or for a slightly altered effect if you played them from the top of your library. Um, so you can cast a card when you draw it, only if it's the first card you draw in a turn. So that's a bit of a difference as well between the miracle term we use in Hearthstone and the miracle term in Magic.
So actually, I'm just actually looking at some interesting threads, and I've just actually looked that apparently Miracle is not actually because of that. Miracle Rogue apparently has got its name because of the even older deck called Miracle Grow
Okay.
from the early days of very old Magic deck. It used a card called Quirion Dryad, which was
Okay.
a card that said whenever you cast a white, blue, black, or red spell, put a 1/1 counter on it. So
Okay.
basically, it was like similar to a quest and adventure kind of
Sure.
idea. So that's according to Reddit posts and even half the Gamepedia, the wiki entry. That's the reason for. Actually, I always thought it was because of the miracle mechanic, but it seems to
Yeah.
actually be from the deck called Miracle Grow.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware of that. So yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention. So whichever uh, source you prefer, it's still a similar idea in that playing like cheap spells or playing spells can give you well, actually, I mean, in the sense that playing cheap spells that replace themselves, the miracle effect in Hearthstone is actually more like a cantrip than a true miracle effect, where in Magic, the Miracle term, you could only cast the first card that you drew that turn, right? So you
It
couldn't
got
like
yeah, it got a
Miracle,
bonus.
Miracle, Miracle. Yeah.
It gave you a bonus.
Yeah, but I mean, in general, it's kind of that idea of like playing off the top of your deck.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, and so then in Hearthstone, we generally see that, as we were talking about with Gadgets and Auctioneer, which, if you think about it, the text of this is basically making your spells cantrip and that they replace themselves. So that's why Rogue gets away with sometimes having some cheap but maybe not that efficient spells. Um, or, cards like Shiv sometimes are even played in Miracle Rogue decks because Shiv essentially draws you two cards then if
exactly.
you play it with the Gadgets and Auctioneer on the board. So yeah, those generally it's kind of combo decks that benefit most from the cantrip idea because it's like drawing one closer to your combo piece every time. Because whenever you can play the crappy card instead, like your Novice Engineer, and then you get a little bit closer to your actual combo pieces, which will win you the game.
Exactly.
Um, and then next we have some terms or some card names even that were basically almost carbon copies from Hearthstone or from Magic to Hearthstone.
Yeah.
And to start that off, we have one of the most obvious examples of this, and that's Lightning Bolt. So do you want to tell the viewers a bit about Lightning Bolt?
So Lightning Bolt is one of the oldest cards in Magic. It was part of so in the original, the very first set of Magic, which they called Alpha. Um, they released a card in each of the 5 colors in Magic that had an effect that cost 1 mana of that color and did something that had involved 3.
Yeah,
So the green version gave +3/+3. The black version added mana. And the red version was Lightning Bolt, which could deal 3 damage to a creature or a player. So much like deal deal three in because in Magic, a lot of cards could only do to a player or to a creature.
yeah,
So
we do
this
see
this is
that
very strong in
sometimes as well.
this is very strong in the fact that it can do both. And in Hearthstone, they inherently, if it says deal X damage, you can deal it to either your opponent's face or a minion.
Yeah,
Unless it says anything other something different.
yeah,
So it's one of the most powerful red spells. Currently, in recent Magic sets, in the standard of Magic, they haven't reprinted it for a very long time because of how powerful it is in standard.
yeah.
Um, it
Yeah, it's definitely sort of one of the most powerful cards and very sought after in certain Magic formats that are more akin to like Wild, where
exactly.
it hasn't been in standard for a long time.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
and it was a common rarity even, and even for a common card, it's worth I think it's worth like 2 to 2.5 US dollars. Which for a common card is
yeah,
a fair bit.
yeah. It was reprinted as an uncommon in
Yeah,
Modern Masters, but yeah,
exactly.
um, yeah. And I mean, for example, like Wild Growth is still pretty much a staple, right? And is a pretty uh, you know balanced effect, if you know what I mean. So like we've seen all of those the cards of that theme that you're talking about have very very different sort of balance points, right?
Yeah.
Lightning Bolt is like just a little too strong for
Oh,
standard. Wild Growth is like it's
no,
fine
it's
in
not. You mean
most
giant
formats.
growth?
No, isn't it Wild Growth?
No, it's called
I
giant
mean,
growth.
oh, sorry, Giant Growth. Yeah, yeah. Sorry,
It's a
I'm
+3.
I'm
The
thinking of the
blue one is a
Hearthstone one.
bit overpowered as well. They basically never. That was so overpowered that they never reprinted, and they've tried to make sort of more balanced versions of it. And that was Ancestral Recall, which was one
Yeah,
blue, draw 3 cards. And
yeah,
this was back in the beginning where they didn't realize how powerful, drawing cards were. And like over the course of Magic's history, they've tried to like fix it and try to, but most of the fixed versions are still very powerful.
yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah,
And then I mean, there's the
the white
black
one is the
version.
worst. The black one is also very strong because the black one basically was like innovate because
Yeah,
it cost 1 black mana and it added 3 black mana to your mana pool.
yeah. I
And
mean,
the white one was
it's
quite bad though. It was like heal for 3 or prevent 3 damage. So that was probably the worst of the lot.
yeah,
But yeah. So that's Lightning Bolt. Another card
yeah.
is
And I mean,
Rampant.
well, I was gonna say in Hearthstone, the way they sort of attempted to balance Lightning Bolt was with the Overload, right?
Yeah.
So it has a similar effect in that it's the same mana cost for the same amount of damage, but they tried to balance it by making it a little bit
More
more
expensive in a
expensive.
sense.
Yeah,
It kind
yeah,
of costs like one
over
and a
two
half to two
turns.
mana.
Yeah,
I mean, in one way you can think of it like that.
yeah. And then you were saying about
Well, the next
the
card I
term
thought would,
ramp in
yeah,
general.
ramp in general. It's mainly, obviously the normal definition of ramp is, to accelerate something up. But specifically in card games, it comes from the Magic card Rampant Growth, which in Magic it also costs two mana, and if I remember correctly, it puts a land which basically is like a mana crystal into play. So
Yeah, and
literally,
into
it's
play
basically
tapped, so it's like
exactly
getting a empty mana
mana.
crystal.
So basically, exactly what Wild Growth does.
Yeah. So I mean, in many ways, you could say wild growth is basically a copy of rampant growth, and is also what,
Functionally, yes, it is.
yeah, is also what lent the name ramp to a lot of the druid decks like that were looking to be ahead on the amount of mana that they have available versus what they should at that
So
stage
therefore,
of
you
the
can
game.
play bigger stuff early. You can play bigger guys early on. That's obviously one of Druid's sort of
Yeah.
core mechanics.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that idea has grown obviously
I
far
see what you
beyond
did there.
Magic, but but yeah, that's definitely one of them. And another card that has, well, in this case, the exact same name is this Time Warp. So Time Warp is basically allows you, or you can make your opponent take an extra turn after this one in Magic. It's also 5 mana in the slightly more balanced version, or a lot more balanced version, versus
Yeah.
the 2 mana
The visual
version
one
that
was
exists
called
in Magic.
Time Walk.
Yeah,
And Time Walk was two mana get take an extra turn, and that
yeah,
was once again in the original set where the Magic designers didn't really know what was going on, and then they, after a
yeah,
while they
pretty much.
realized they had messed up pretty badly, and like that card is one of the rarest cards to get, and it's banned in most formats.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
it's an extremely powerful card, and I mean,
yeah,
whereas
they
we
didn't
see in
realize.
Hearthstone, when you complete the Mage quest, you get a card called Time Warp, which is literally 5 mana, take an extra turn.
Which is the
So
fixed version of it, which is basically also Magic did the similar thing and tried to make a fixed version that also costs five mana,
yeah,
which obviously isn't as good because five mana is a lot more than two mana.
yeah, it means you have to use up a lot more mana in your first turn, so you can't
Sets
functionally
up
do as much. Yeah,
things, yeah.
yeah. And Time Warp quite nicely leads us to um, a Magic deck or a Hearthstone deck that it lends its name from a non-Magic card here for a change, or for a set of cards, and that's Exodia Mage, or the term Exodia in general at least, comes from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
Where Exodia the Forbidden One was a set of 5 cards that basically, when you had all 5 parts of Exodia on the field, you won the game.
Yeah, it was a win condition, yeah.
Yeah, so this is usually used to refer to multi-card combos that will win you the game. Um, not they don't in Hearthstone at least they're not explicitly always 5 copy or 5 different cards. But recently we have seen Exodia Mage, which is exactly 5 cards,
Yeah, so that's why it's
being
kind of flavorfully.
yeah, yeah,
It's the Sorcerer's Apprentices, the Molten Reflections, and then Archmage Antonidas.
yeah. So in that way we have an exact sort of Exodia replication in Hearthstone. Of course, this one does also require time walk. I mean time warp. Um, in order to actually work, right? Because you have
Yeah,
to do the time warp after you
I
copy
s-
your Sorcerer's Apprentices.
let's do the time warp again.
Yes. Um, but yeah, so actually, technically, this is kind of a 6 card combo if you think about it. That
But
requires a bunch of setup, right? And that
yeah, it requires a lot of setup.
it requires you to play random spells that or random cards that weren't from your deck. So yeah, but it has definitely been coined with the term Exodia Mage. I mean, we've had a lot of combos in the past in Hearthstone, involving maybe cards like Prophet Valen and Mind Blasts and Flash Heals after you like embrace the shadow.
Yeah,
That was a thing. There was also
with Zombie Chars and Okana, that was a
yeah,
thing.
and the the divine spirit in a fire shenanigans from priest as well. But a lot of these were more than 5 card combos, uh, and a lot of them also required reductions from cards like Emperor Thaurissan to actually
And also, a lot of them
make
were
work.
burst combos, so
Yeah,
they did a set amount of damage as opposed to instantly winning the game. So the reason why, like the Exodia Mage is called that is because the fact that you generate infinite fireballs means you're not limited because even combos involving like the Orcanize and even those combos still have a flaw in terms of they can only deal 30 damage or
yeah,
35 or whatever the case is.
yeah. So this is literally you win the game,
Yeah.
unless you don't have the APM required to cast an infinite number of fireballs or however many it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So next we have one of your favorite terms and one of your favorite things to do in Hearthstone, and that's tilt. You want to tell us a bit about tilt?
Okay, so tilt, so sort of if you backtrack, tilt it comes from poker, but even from poker, it comes from originally pinball, and it come basically in poker, it became to mean that when you have a what they call in poker a bad beat, when you have like a bad run of luck, and then after that you start sort of playing bet poorly, you start making poor decisions, and like in poker you start you start betting rashly, you start making sort of very risky, unnecessarily risky plays,
Yeah.
and sort of what happens is then as you're told it's sort of it's a downward spiral because then you will get unlucky, so you'll go, okay, I got unlucky, and then it's a case of then you'll make a bad decision, and then you might even still get a bit unlucky, but then it starts becoming the case of you get unlucky and you play badly, and then it just kind of goes
Yeah,
downhill.
a downward spiral.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely sort of where the term, what the term means in Hearthstone as well, right? So,
Yeah.
in many ways, the meaning of the term has also been more literally taken from poker, which makes sense, being another card game with obviously random elements and, well, variance inherent in it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but where originally, it was referred to like uh, when a pinball machine would be tilted, and then I believe like the flappers stopped working. I actually never played that much pinball or something,
Yeah.
so it was basically like in pinball a mechanism to prevent you from cheating uh, the pinball machine. They sort of had
Yeah.
sensors in to prevent them. So in that ways, it didn't really that meaning didn't really translate.
Exactly.
Yeah. And next, we have a term for sort of deck archetype that mostly has become extinct in Hearthstone. The only remaining version of it is Highlander Priest, really. And
Referino.
you want to tell us a bit about Highlander?
Okay, so Highlander. Okay, so also kind of it's got like sort of got two cycles of how it became into card games. So Highlander evolved from the Magic multiplayer format called Older Dragon Highlander, which was a
Yeah,
format played by Magic judges, who are basically like the referees or judges, or basically
yeah,
judges at tournaments, and they played it in their time and it was decks consisting of single copies of cards, except
yeah,
their versions of mana. And where that came from was the movie Highlander, where the iconic phrase of "there can only be one,"
yeah,
and naturally that's because the deck obviously only has one of. In Hearthstone recently, that was a very popular thing, especially because of the card called Reno.
yeah,
Um, but obviously now that Reno's rotated out of standard, like a lot of them, they either get called Highlander decks or they get called Kazakus decks because obviously Kazakus is one of the the more powerful singleton cards.
yeah,
But yeah, unfortunately we don't really see that many singleton decks because the whole concept is that by playing single cards, you play single powerful cards. Obviously the main issue in any card game is the consistency because you only run one copy.
yeah,
Magic normal decks would run up to 4 copies, and in Hearthstone you can run 2 copies of a card.
yeah. And I mean, in Magic, Highlander or EDH is generally a much more casual format.
Yeah,
Whereas I mean, in Hearthstone, we saw Reno decks being sort of top tier competitive in Reno Mage and Reno
and
Warlock. Yeah, before the release of Journey to Ungoro.
exactly.
Yeah, so you know, it is definitely an interesting term that, as you said, has gone through like multiple iterations of card games to getting to us in Hearthstone.
Yeah,
And I mean, with all these terms, it's very interesting to know where they come from, and that helps you like better understand the concept, right? Because a lot of them are quite foreign concepts. Like the concept of zoo is quite a weird concept. For example, if you don't have the card game background and understand sort of
wonder why.
what the common theme is in zoo and why that's sort of a term, you say like a deck is zooey, you know. In Hearthstone or these days, it really doesn't mean that it has anything to do with beasts or sort of animals anymore. Whereas it's more just that it plays like the original sort of zoo decks in Magic.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that's the thing, like you're saying, is like now the version of the decks have evolved to the point where because the style of the deck is still similar, even though it doesn't run a lot of those cards. Like Zoo, you're wondering where does the name come from?
Yeah,
Miracle, there's nothing like there's no cards or anything that really is called Miracle.
yeah. And then there's another term that isn't so much related to a specific card, but or like mechanic within the game, and that's scoop. So scoop
Ah,
is
yes.
usually what Magic players say when they concede. So it refers to the literal picking up of your lands and your cards to put them back in your deck and shuffle for the next game,
Yeah.
uh, hopefully. Um, and in Hearthstone, this is a term that's not so commonly used anymore. It was relatively well used, but now has kind of been replaced by the bottom right meme, which makes a lot more sense really in the
In
context of
Hearthstone.
Hearthstone. It is really about going bottom right and clicking that concede button. Yeah. So, what would you say is your favorite out of all the terms we've covered, Panamonia?
I don't know, it's tough to say. Like, Zoo kind of always brings back sort of, memories, like, I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't play a lot of competitive, but like sort of just thinking of, the original Zoo. I mean, Exodia, obviously, when I watched a bit of Yu-Gi-Oh as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's sort of just sometimes some of them just bring back sort of memories of that card game, or of the time when that deck was popular.
Yeah. Yeah. The nostalgia aspect.
Exactly, the
Yeah.
nostalgia, and I think like intentionally, I think a lot of the Hearthstone ones they purposely did it,
Sure.
because the card game, they borrowed a lot of ideas from different card games.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, the Hearthstone game devs making a card like Lightning Bolt is very much a shout out to, Magic, and like the card games that came before them, which is sort of an important thing for them to do, right? Rather than
Yeah,
trying to be all like, we are the only card game that matters, they have to sort of
pay
acknowledge,
homage to it.
yeah, pay homage to the things that came before them, or and are still happening. I
And
mean, Magic is
a lot
still
of the
doing well.
flavor text, if people actually do read the flavor text of the Hearthstone cards, some of them do reference like other card games, or they reference obviously
Yeah.
pop culture, and it's constantly the sort of paying tribute to things that
Yeah, I mean,
help shape them.
Hearthstone is very common for that. I mean, the devs put, or whoever the team is involved in flavor text for cards, seem to put a lot of effort in. Um,
Yeah. And sometimes like some of them are super cheesy, but some of them are really funny. Some of them are like in the feels.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that's all we really have for this week. Relatively short episode. Just trying to help players that don't come from the same card gaming backgrounds as us to try and help introduce them to a lot of these terms they might not know before. So, if there's any other terms you think we missed, please give us
A
tweet at
comment.
us,
Yeah.
yeah, or comment on the video, or reach out through any mechanism,
Any
smoke
mechanism.
rings, rain
Pigeon, carrier
dances, whatever
pigeons.
you think will work, but ideally things that we can actually interpret. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so reach out to us, let us know if you think we've missed anything, maybe we missed your favorite mechanics, and then also please like and subscribe to the video. Helps the channel grow. And if you have any other ideas for future things you'd like us to discuss, then let me know that as well, and we'll see if we can fit it into the schedule.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, anything else from you before we go, before we sign off?
No, it's just always, sometimes fun to do sort of not game related and sort of some of the lore and some of the, it's always, I think, good to get some of the background and,
Yeah,
just kind of get yourself immersed in the game. Because I think sometimes, especially myself, sometimes you get caught up too much of just the playing the game in terms
yeah,
of the numbers and the technical aspects that you forget about the pictures, about the stories, about the origins of things,
yeah,
and
yeah,
sometimes it's just nice to do that.
yeah. Okay, well,
Cool.
that's all for us. Thanks a lot for watching. Cheers.